All right, so you're not going to believe this story. It's about a full-blown intellectual invasion, a time when these super dense, really complex philosophical ideas from Paris just took over the American university. We're talking about how thinkers like Foucault and Derrida became these huge names, but not where you'd expect. Not in philosophy. Nope, somewhere else entirely.
And that's the big question, right? That's the mystery we're unpacking here. Why literature departments? I mean, think about it. These guys were arguing about the nature of truth and power, so how did they end up as the heroes for professors of poetry and novels? It's a genuinely bizarre twist, and the answer is this wild tale of ambition, crisis, and straight-up intellectual warfare.
Okay, so let's set the stage. We have to go back to the 1970s. This is when a bundle of texts, later called French theory, started showing up in the United States. And let me tell you, their journey across the Atlantic was anything but simple.
So here's the absolute key to the whole story. The very first move was what you might call a decontextualization. See, these guys were philosophers. They were arguing with other philosophers in France. But when their work landed in the US, it was immediately vacuumed up by literary studies. They were stripped of their original context. They weren't being read as philosophers anymore. They were being read as literary critics. And get this, the numbers really tell the story. Look at this chart. Between 75 and 80, just as Derrida's actually becoming a little less influential back home in France, his star is going supernova in American literary circles. It's a perfect inverse relationship. So this wasn't just about importing ideas. It was a total reinvention, a rebranding for a whole new market. And you can just feel the excitement in the air. For academics in the US, like the legendary Edward Said, reading these texts was like a bomb going off. When Said talks about the daring epistemological sweep, what he's really saying is that Foucault was questioning everything, the very foundations of how we know what we know. It was absolutely electrifying.
But, this excitement didn't just happen in a vacuum. To really get why theory took off like a rocket, you have to understand the world it landed in. And the American University of the 1970s, well, it was basically a war zone. So just picture it. You've got departments clawing at each other for funding. You've got students running away from the humanities and flocking to business and science. There was this feeling of a real ecological struggle, a fight for survival. And in the middle of all this, you had literature departments, which were often seen as a bit fluffy. They were desperate for a way to prove their relevance and fight back. And then along comes the perfect weapon. In these strange, newly translated texts from France, literature scholars found exactly what they were looking for. This was their chance, not just to defend their turf, but to go on the attack. The weapon itself? It was brilliant in a way. You could call it narrative relativism. And the big idea was this. Everything, a legal brief, a scientific paper, a work of history, it's all just another kind of narrative, just another story. And who are the undisputed experts at taking apart and interpreting stories? Well, literary scholars, of course. Suddenly, the entire university was their playground. It was almost like an intellectual assembly line, a recipe for academic domination. Step 1, you take these super dense, chewy philosophical arguments from France. Step 2, you run them through the literature department machine. Step 3, you boil them down into these flexible, almost slogan-like concepts. And step 4, you declare that everything is now a text that only you have the tools to analyze.
And once they had this powerful new arsenal, this thing they called theory with a capital T, they didn't just sit back. Oh no, they went on the march. It was time to expand the empire. And the result was just a seismic shift in power. The English department, which had been this kind of quiet corner of the university, suddenly became the new Rome. It was the center of power, sending out its legions to conquer and evangelize the other disciplines with its new gospel. And if you want proof of this new era, just look at the kind of stuff they were talking about. The main literature conference, the MLA, used to be pretty tame. But suddenly, you're seeing panels with titles like The Sodomite Tourist or Guns and Barbies. I mean, these were topics that would have been absolutely unthinkable just a few years earlier. It was a whole new world. And the conquest just kept going. Their empire expanded everywhere. They marched into film studies, remaking it from the ground up. They invaded the law schools, creating this new field called critical legal studies. They even, and I'm not kidding you, got into theology departments, with scholars using Derrida to talk about a postmodern God. No field was safe. But of course, Every empire has a rebellion. The empire strikes back, right? An invasion this total was bound to create some enemies. And the philosophy departments, especially, well, let's just say they were not happy to see their field's biggest names being used by their new literary overlords.
And to really get why they fought back, you have to understand that these two groups were from completely different planets. On one side, you've got American philosophy, which is all about logic, precision, clarity. They see the philosopher as a kind of careful, sober technician. On the other side, you've got this new crew who think philosophy is all about big, bold, stylish arguments, that philosophy is basically a high-level form of literature. They were speaking completely different languages.
And some critics were absolutely scathing. The great Camille Paglia just came right out and said it. For her, all this French theory wasn't an intellectual movement, it was a status symbol. It was the academic equivalent of driving a BMW or wearing a Rolex. It was about looking smart, not actually being smart.
So, after all that, where does it leave us? What was theory in the end? Was it this incredible critical tool that blew open the doors of knowledge? Or was it really just a clever recruitment strategy, a hot commodity on the academic marketplace that helped one department win a turf war? You know, the really fascinating thing is that its true legacy is that it was probably all of those things at once.